Pennsylvania State Police for over 24 years, where he currently serves as the Director of the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. His responsibilities include statewide oversight of the investigative programs and specialized investigative resources for the nation's 10th largest police agency, including intelligence and counterterrorism, drug enforcement, organized crime, domestic security, computer crime, and covert operations. Major Burig earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from Salisbury University and a Master of Science degree in the Administration of Justice and Homeland Security from Wilmington University. He is also a graduate of the FBI National Academy. And last year, Major Burig completed FBI International Leadership in the Counterterrorism Program. And lastly, Doug and I attend the same weekly cycle class at the gym. And one day, I waited until the end of class after he was pretty exhausted, depleted of energy, and requested that he come share his knowledge with the 22nd largest club in the world. So here we are today. If you could all put your hands together and help me welcome Major Douglas Burig.
Thank you so much for having me to talk about this very sobering topic. And unfortunately, since Courtney and I first discussed this incident, there's been so many more that have occurred, so it's even perhaps more topical. Congratulations on becoming the 22nd largest Rotary club in the world. That's just tremendous. It just shows the type of commitment and what can be done when you bring the private and public sector together, which will be, you'll see that throughout the theme of what I'm talking about. If you just hold your questions to the end, I'm willing to answer anything that I didn't cover during the presentation. I'm also going to hang around afterwards if you have anything you want to talk about offline or you didn't want to speak about in front of the group. But it's my intention today to provide you with an overview of the threat posed by active shooters, some of the behaviors that are exhibited by these individuals, and you're going to see there's not a set pattern or something we can identify that tells us definitively this is going to happen. But most importantly, some resources that are available for you, your agency, to prepare for one of these unfortunate events. So let's first talk about where can this happen? If you think about where you've been in the last week of your life, whether it's a gym, a church, a retail store, a stadium, a sports field with one of your children, a theater, and on, pretty much anywhere you've been, there's been an active shooter attack multiple times at one of those locations. So we have to move beyond the it won't happen here, where it probably won't happen here, and that's always somewhere else. On the screen, just some of the incidents that have occurred, most of these in Pennsylvania. Gym, Courtney and I attended LA Fitness. There was a mass shooting where over 4 people were killed in Pittsburgh. Tree Life Synagogue, a very recent incident in Pittsburgh just last year, and all the various educational institutions, both large and small. Perhaps we're in denial, perhaps it's just human nature, it's always going to be somewhere else, or I really don't have to worry about that here, I mean it's Southern York County for God's sake. And, but those of you know we've been touched by violence in York County at Red Lion High School, I believe it was 2003. The unfortunate death of a principal. Unfortunately, no other students were harmed in that horrendous event. But when you look at this statistically, you are more likely to encounter an incident like this than any time in our history before. The first event really occurred in 1960, but why now? What is so different about now? Let's talk about the statistics. I really think that'll kind of level set the conversation. And sometimes with trends, whether it's terrorism, whether it's other types of criminal activity, there's a perception that it's worse. York City is worse than it was before, or a particular community has a problem. And sometimes it's not reality, but in this case, perception is reality. It's not your imagination that there's more of these incidents. They are occurring with much greater frequency than ever before in our history. So let's look at 2000 to 2006, 6.4 incidents per year. Fast forward all the way to 2017, 2018, you're literally 4 times more likely to encounter one of these events than we were in 2000 and 2006. By any measure, that's a huge increase. Difficult to explain. We'll talk just a little bit more about that as we move forward. 19 incidents so far this year, and I hate to use the terms so far this year, but my experience tells me what I've seen recently is we're likely to see additional incidents. The consequences, over 2,500 people killed or injured. We've had military campaigns in our country with less casualties than what's occurring on our streets in America right now. And this is only active shooters, somebody with 4 or more casualties. This doesn't include the double shootings that we routinely see in a lot of our urban areas and in our communities throughout Pennsylvania. Many of you in this room probably fall into the commerce or education sector, and the vast majority of these incidents have occurred there. And I don't think there's any business that's immune to this. It could emanate from inside your organization, somebody targeted because they work there, or it may just be it's a large place with a lot of people and it's a soft target. How many of these incidents have we thwarted? That's really difficult for us to figure out. The limitations of the crime stats that we collect throughout Pennsylvania just don't allow. Sometimes somebody is charged with recklessly endangering another person, terroristic threats, attempted homicide, and various crimes, but there's not a category for your local police department to record we thwarted an active shooter attack. So we really don't know. But I can tell you, just since the most recent incidents around the country, over 30 have been thwarted across the country, and I saw 2 in Pennsylvania just last week, including you might have heard about the one in Pittsburgh where somebody said, posted this on Twitter, I believe, I'm going to commit a hate crime at a hospital in Pittsburgh. Exhaustive amount of work with us, the FBI, our local partners, to run that down, and it turns out it was a 16-year-old kid who was bored. That was his explanation. So, hundreds of man-hours, tens of thousands of taxpayer dollars to get to that point. And that's just one of many. Not uncommon on an average day to see five incidents like that. The last full year of statistics, 2018, you can see kind of the spread around the country. Most of the states where this is occurring most frequently is where the population centers are, so that makes sense. We're not seeing any patterns for one particular area or one particular state that there's anything in the environment that would make it more likely to occur there. During 2018, 2 of those events were in Pennsylvania, including the Tree of Life Synagogue shooting in Pittsburgh. Here's all the events from 2019 up through, I believe, September 3rd was the cutoff. Again, a lot of same states, a lot of population centers, but if I was to put the map side by side, you would see there's a whole host of other communities that were affected by this in 19 that did not see it in years prior. So the big question is why? That's probably the most frequently asked question that I get about my job is, Doug, why is this going on? How can we explain this? And it's really difficult. And I'm going to give you my opinion for my lawyers back at department headquarters. It's not the official state police position. It's Doug Burig's opinion, so really appreciate my disclaimer there. Clearly, these people were inspired by the acts of others. If you peel back through all these investigations, look at the after actions. For instance, Adam Lanza, the Sandy Hook shooter, had articles about the nickel mine shooter in his bedroom. They're watching what others are doing and perceived success that they're having, and it's clearly inspiring other people. They want their actions are going to be known around the world as soon as they do it. And I really think that's what drives this. It's not the media's fault. It's simply they're taking advantage of the fact that we will know about a shooting in Denmark minutes after it happens. And this is something in 1960, 1985, this might have been a local or a regional story. But now with your news alerts on your phone, and with the availability of the internet, we all know in seconds when these occur. And I think that's driving it as well. And they want to be in for this. There's a contest. In their manifestos, if they leave them behind, like Joe, they look back to other people they've seen who they would consider successful, like Klebold and Harris at Columbine in 1999. I see that over and over again. They want to leave their mark. They want to be heard. They want to get attention, perhaps in life that they didn't get prior to that. Just a little bit of the post-event. One thing that's a little bit surprising is how many of these people are taken into custody. You would think for most people this would be a one-way, a suicidal type mission. I think for some of these, based on what I've seen, a lot of them probably did not intend to come out of it alive and either lost their nerve at the very end or through the actions of a private citizen or police were taken into custody to face trial. So what are we observing? Pretty typical scene at a restaurant, movie theater, my dining room table where my children are staring at their devices when I'm trying to talk to them, find out about their day. Right? This is just the era of which we live. We don't even know what's going on around us sometimes. How many times have you been walking in an airport or on a public street, somebody literally walks right into you as they were staring at the phone? It happened to me the other day. They didn't even say excuse me. But who might have known something? I think when you look at these incidents, you go back, almost always in the autopsy of the incident, you'll see there were opportunities to interdict these. Not always, but in a high percentage of the time. So probably the key is being able to recognize those and be attuned to that.
I'm here at the scene of tomorrow's shooting, where a 15-year-old will kill 4 children, 2 adults, and then turn the gun on himself.
When the shooting starts happening tomorrow, first I'll probably just think it's firecrackers or a car backfiring or something.
He told some of us that his dad kept a gun in his closet, and he always talked about using it on, you know, the people that bullied him. Tomorrow I'll probably say that I wish I told someone.
You know, after the shooting, we're going to feel pretty bad about picking on him, but until then, we'll probably just keep doing it because he's pretty weird.
Tomorrow I'll probably point out that something has seemed off with him since the beginning of the school year.
And I'm now joined by the officers who will be the first responders tomorrow. What additional details can you share with us?
Well, someone is expected to tell us after the shooting that the shooter has been posting on social media about doing this for weeks.
So how will you explain the shooting to your daughter?
Actually, I won't get to explain it to her because she won't make it.
This is Christine Lynn, reporting from the scene of another shooting we'll say we never saw coming.
Unfortunately, that's pretty much what we see. Played out over and over again in the news cycles. And I think our attention is relatively short, 2, 3, 4 news cycles, depending on how heinous the incident is. And we're kind of back to our regular lives again. What we see in law enforcement is there's always a huge spike of incidents reported to us and threats after something occurs anywhere in the country, sometimes even overseas, such as the attack in New Zealand. I definitely saw an uptick. But I've seen nothing as large as the uptick after the Parkland shooting in Florida last year. We saw an increase in tips through our Intelligence Fusion Center into law enforcement that was 400% to 500% of what we've normally seen. But again, we track these and look about 6 weeks after, the tip reporting drops back down. So I would advocate to you, this is something that we need to keep up. The same level of readiness and the same just attention to detail all the time because of the threat that we face. We all agree that the best opportunity to interdict or stop one of these events prior to it happening is to get a better understanding of what drives these people and do they display any behaviors that can be identified or we could act before. And like I told you, I've seen many, many times where we're interdicting these, and sometimes it's very quiet, there's not a big news flash, and if it's a juvenile, their name's probably not even going to be released unless they charge as an adult. But the most definitive study that I've seen on this that, you know, if you have time or you're a student of this subject that I would encourage you to read, was one that the FBI published in June of last year. Pre-Attack Indicators Active Shooters in the United States, and it studied it from, I believe it was 2000 to 2013. We submitted a case study to be part of this, but it was a really comprehensive look of all the events. And the advantage this study had, they had the actual police reports. So every interview that was done, every piece of information was available to the investigator. So to me, this is a really good look. I believe the end was 160 total incidents. It was done by the FBI Behavioral Science Unit. Andre Simmons, I've talked to him many times. In fact, I saw him in Quantico a few weeks ago. But it really focused on looking at the stressors and the concerning behavior that are exhibited by some of these individuals. And that's kind of the working definition, just so you understand where they're coming from when they're describing these different, and it had to be an observable behavior. Certainly something occurring in somebody's mind within their fantasy realm that's not identifiable, then we would never have a chance of picking that up. But the bottom line is there's no single checklist. There's no, if the person exhibits 3 of these behaviors in a 6-month period, they are 50% more likely to commit a shooting. We are dealing with human behavior and different people. Everyone's affected differently by stressors in their life. We all face them daily. But what they did find is that an average of 4 to 5 of these behaviors were exhibited in the months and years leading up to the crimes. So unfortunately, we can't create an algorithm yet through artificial intelligence that crunching all of this data together, Doug, this is the guy who's going to do it next. And we can move forward and try to stop them. Not yet, I say. And here are some of the stressors. I think you guys can pretty much all read. I won't read them to you. But these are the most common signs that we saw throughout all 170 incidents. Go to the second set of them. So I'll tell you a little bit about my experience with it, in my opinion. Talking about other incidents, to me, is something that I've seen very common in almost every incident that I've been a part of. If they're actively talking about it in a glowing manner, that's a definite red flag. And also acquisition and storage of weapons. Somebody who never had weapons and suddenly buys 3 and is practicing with them. We interdicted, I can't talk about this one too much, but we interdicted one in South Central Pennsylvania with a juvenile who was practicing with the weapon and was going to commit attack on a church. And we were able to interdict it because a family member spoke up. But these are the 2, in my opinion, that we always look for. But once again, we struggle with this. We just can't sit at our desk and all these threats that roll in and just accurately assess who's going, as we joke among ourselves, who's aspirational and who's operational. So you're thinking, God, why don't people report this? We think that time and time again when we see the news reports as shown in that video. And this is some of the impediments, why people don't report it. I mean, this is what they tell us after the fact. Sometimes the small piece of information that you think is innocuous and doesn't mean anything, we may have other information that added together makes the difference between we're going to file somebody 24 hours a day versus we're just going to keep a loose tab on this, on an open case, an open guardian lead in the FBI system, something of that nature. So I would encourage you to report everything. It's going to be logged with the systems we have now. Hopefully we can make sense of it, but it definitely gets our attention when more than one person reports something and we start seeing patterns. So report everything. Everybody wants to be judging other people. We encourage everyone, just focus on the behaviors. Not race, not ethnicity, not any biases that you might have, and I know there's implicit bias that none of us can really avoid, but just focus on the behaviors and report that. And with the proliferation of social media, I see it as both a challenge and an opportunity. The challenge is there's billions of tweets every day that we're trying to sort through to find words such as school and shooter within 3 words apart, or any of the typical anti-Semitic remarks, anything that might be indicative of a hate crime. So that's the challenge of it. Probably the opportunity with social media, as everybody is staring at their devices and spending more time, hopefully you spend a lot of time on your Rotary Club website. And if you see anything concerning, that's an opportunity to report it to us. So there's more eyes on social media, including my children. And we're finding more and more of these people are posting things on social media or leaking or leakage, as we refer to it, that could be indicative of something bad is about to happen. We're trying to use all types of technology like you are in the private sector. Those of you that are looking at your brand and trying to protect your brand are doing the same thing. We're just trying to protect the safety of the public, and that's why we are. Certainly across the internet, there's never enough eyes, there's never enough systems, and it changes every day. Every technology that we develop is antiquated in a matter of months. So why does it happen? There's a variety of reasons. I'll just scroll through these just for the sake of time. For those of you in the room, the disgruntled employee would probably be of primary concern. The person on the inside who has a grievance, either known or unknown, and is willing to act. An example of this probably at the worst end, was the May shooting in Virginia Beach, the municipal building, when he emailed his resignation and hours later came in and wound up killing 12 of his colleagues. I'm here before you today not only because of my position or my responsibilities, but as someone who's witnessed one of these events. Not everybody could probably pick out the worst moment of their life. You may not know the exact minute, but for me, I know the exact minute that it was. On October 2nd, 2006, it started out as a pretty normal day. I was a sergeant. I was in charge of the investigative division of the Lancaster Barracks. And we were sent to a one-room Amish schoolhouse in Bart Township, Lancaster County, myself and 9 other troopers. And it was reported there was a man inside with a gun. When I arrived at the school, we couldn't see anything. The windows were completely pulled down, and we didn't know it at the time, but it was completely barricaded on the inside. The gunman called 911, and he said he had 10 female hostages. There was 10 girls laying on the floor of the school. They were all between 6 and 12 years old. Sorry, it's the hard part. You know, from outside, we didn't know exactly what was occurring inside. We didn't know what the hostages were. There were a lot of resources coming to the scene. Inside, he was talking about sexually assaulting the girls. And for some unknown reason, at 11:05, he shot all 10 girls. I was standing about 40 yards from the school when it happened. We were surprised by the blast of gunfire because we'd been on the scene for 15 minutes at this point. And there didn't seem to be anything from the outside that we could see that had particularly changed. I heard shotgun blasts fired by a rapid succession of handguns when he shot all 10 of the girls. Their feet were tied together so they couldn't run away. Those 9 people who were with me, they fought really heroically to get inside. When we came inside, the shooter took his own life as we went through the door. It took about a minute and a half to fight through the barricades to get inside. He was shooting at those troopers that were with me while they were trying to do that. That's when I saw the 10 girls lying underneath the chalkboard. All 10 had been shot, and the majority had been shot in the head. And we tried to work on them inside, but it was really just too dark. There's no lights in our school. So I told the guys we're going to have to move them outside. So we carried them outside, and it was much better in the bright sunlight where we could work on them out there and try to save their lives. It was horrific. Watching the girls die in the arms of 2 of my colleagues was the worst part. And those are the most haunting memories to this day. We became very close with the Amish families afterwards, and kind of gained strength through getting through it together. But you know, they said, hey, go out and share the lessons learned from this incident. If you can help save another police officer or a child, then you should do that. So we pledged that we would do that. And that's really one of the reasons why I stand here today, to that end, and to keep my promise. Now, I hope that none of you have to experience this. And I hope by talking about it today and taking some of the steps that will go into the next section that we can all collectively work together to prevent these tragedies from happening, or at least mitigate the loss if they do occur. It's very personal for me, obviously. So what can you do? We've talked about the scope of the problem. I've discussed the importance of suspicious activity reporting and how the lack of suspicious activity reporting can really adversely affect what we do. But what else can you do? And I know many of you are doing a great job in this field right now. I applaud you for that. One of the most important steps you and your company can take is to have an emergency action plan. Now, I realize we have a variety of companies here in the room. Some are very large. You have large professional security operations or health and safety. They're writing the plans, they're revising them constantly, but I also realize we have some very small companies in the room. But regardless of your size, your scale, or what your industry is, you have to have one of these plans. You owe it to the people that you work with. And even if you don't have the resources to do it yourself, there are so many resources out there to help you accomplish this. But everybody has to have one. It might be part of your overall all hazards plan or continuity of operations for business, but there's also specific indexes you can add to address the active shooter threat itself. This is just some of the elements that you'll see in any plan. Again, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to belabor that, but I'll show you a couple resources you can go to. The best thing, far and away, as a resource is the U.S. Department of Homeland Security website. If you just Google DHS active shooter preparedness, it's going to be one of the first couple returns. So you don't have to write that address down. It's really impressive. And it's not only, it's fillable templates. So if you are starting from the ground up and you have no sort of plan, there's a fillable template. Fill in the officers in your company, they're going to be responsible for implementing the plan. The legal aspects of it. Communications to your employee, how are you going to do that? And it literally walks through the process. There's a 2-hour video on how to watch if you assign this to one of your members of your team to make that happen. There's also training for your employees. If you don't have the wherewithal or the ability to provide that training, the training's available right through DHS. In addition to that, they will send people to your facilities if asked, and they even have a risk assessment team, as well as the Pennsylvania State Police has risk and vulnerability assessment teams that will come to your facility to do an assessment. Now, I'll be honest with you, the demand for those services are tremendous, and there's a long waiting list, so it probably won't be in short order. That will be, and we are trying to prioritize schools and houses of worship just because that's where we feel the greatest threat is currently. Recognizing some of the signs that I went through quickly, you can make it part of your annual training for your folks, refresher training, along with CPR and first aid, about recognizing signs for the active shooter. Having a plan is great, it's an important first step, but if it's not taught to your employees, if it's not regularly exercised, I doubt if it's going to be really effective when it happens. These incidents are chaotic when they occur. Even the best laid plans, even if they're rehearsed, there's going to be problems and people are going to forget. But if you educate your employees about them, you keep these updated, if your building has changed. I see this with schools all the time. Schools don't update us about additions or temporary classrooms they have on site. It makes it really difficult for us when we're responding in seconds count. But everybody needs to know their role during an emergency. We oversee the Pennsylvania Criminal Intelligence Center. It's one of the 78 fusion centers that are across the United States. They were built after 9/11 for counter-terrorism, but we quickly realized that they're in a unique position to address any criminal threat. So this is a 24/7 operation. It's in Harrisburg. And in 2011, we started a partnership with Critical Infrastructure, where we have a whole cadre of analysts that are just dedicated to interacting with you in the private sector. These services used to only be offered to law enforcement, but now you can actually call, speak to an analyst directly, find out about threats in your area, and just overall criminal activity, regardless of what your business is. And this is how you get a hold of them. I don't know if you could Google this one, but you can speak directly to a critical infrastructure analyst that's familiar. And we have them divided across the critical sectors, so they're familiar. If you're in communications, if you're in government facilities, manufacturing, military, industrial base, whatever the case may be. And this is also a great venue to report suspicious activity. Sometimes you may not know the address or the phone number or the website for your local police department. We will assure you that any tip that comes in is going to be handled the right way. It's going to be shared with the partners that need to see it so that we can action it properly. We also have a smartphone app, See Something, Send Something. It's free in the Android and the Android store and iOS store, excuse me. You can take a photo of what you're seeing. You can just type a quick message. We get some interesting things sent in on the app from college students late at night. But we also get a variety of really important tips that have like the arrest of individuals, from tips on murder, drugs, terrorism, and threats to school. As you might know, the state launched the Safe to Say program. It's targeted specifically at schools, but anybody can also jump on and report a threat. We're just trying to give you as many avenues and as many mediums as possible to report this important information. But I hope this has provided you with a more complete picture of the threat posed by active shooters. And it's not my intention to scare you today or to demoralize you, although at certain points I'm sure you probably felt that way. But it's more to inspire you to act, to use your positions to prepare for these events and reduce the likelihood that this phenomenon will continue. And I've seen throughout my career that when the public sector and private sector come together and use our ingenuity and our creativity, that anything is possible. And I'm confident that we can completely overcome these challenges and work together to save the lives of our colleagues, our friends, and our family members. I want to thank you for having me here today. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Really touched. Yes, sir.
What is your agency's position on publicly releasing information on the shooter, him or herself, name, photo, they go after notoriety?
Okay, great question. For those of you who couldn't hear what he was asking, what's our agency's position on releasing the name of the shooter, notoriety, feeding into this notoriety? A lot of the times we're working, whether it's a federal prosecutor or a local district attorney, we're going to honor their wishes. Those that have to prosecute the case, we're going to honor their wishes. Personally, I'm against releasing the names. Canada has legislation that won't allow it. Now, I'm not naive. In our world of rap technology and texts and Twitter, you guys are going to know in 10 minutes, even when the police don't release it. As soon as the neighborhood interviews start, or we go to the workplace, or we go to the school. So we know it's going to get out. But I don't think it should come from us. And our default is to try to not release the information. But if that local district attorney, the federal prosecutor we're working with, for whatever reason, or their initial court appearance, we can't hide it, then so be it. But I do think this feeds into it. I like the fact that I'm seeing more law enforcement agencies not mentioning the name over and over again. I hope we can't remember Klebold and Harris from 1999. In fact, I would defy you to try to come up with the names of the person who's responsible for the Odessa shooting. I can't remember it myself. Great question. Yes, sir.
Can you comment on the pros and cons of gun-free zones?
Yeah. Pros and cons of gun-free zones. Wow, right in the jackpot on Facebook Live. Commissioners watching carefully, I'm sure. We enforce the law. If there's an area where guns are allowed and that particular business or industry is going to allow it, we're simply going to enforce the law. Do these people pick those locations because it's a gun-free zone? I don't know if I could get into their thought process that deep, but certainly if your goal is a high body count and infamy, the more people that are there to stop you quickly is going to prevent you from achieving your goal. I think you're less likely to attack a festival where there's lots of armed, uniformed law enforcement versus a one-room Amish schoolhouse that he knew he could take over. So that's simply up to, we're simply going to enforce the law of what it says under federal or state law, and that's up to the individual businesses, and certainly we're going to prosecute somebody vigorously that violates those laws. Yeah, great question. I wish I could get off on it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you ever see it happening that it will become a law that public venues have to have these active shooting drills on an annual basis? Or, I mean, you know, you go to concerts and you worry, and you go to movie theaters, you go to, you know, different places, and it's obviously always a concern.
Okay. So the question was, should there be a law, should there be legislation to mandate active shooter training at public space, crowded spaces as we call them, public venues? I think it's tough to legislate, you know, one size fits all, and it's tough. So what about the smaller facilities that don't have a lot of resources, personnel? You know, how much can we mandate them as the government to do it? I know if you receive grant funding, if you receive some state or local funding, it's mandated, and that's probably the best way to go. And I would just hope morally, and as people who care about their employees and the people that come to their facilities, that they're going to undertake that type of training. And hopefully my law enforcement colleagues are going to encourage that. They should be reaching out to you. Establish a relationship with your local law enforcement or state police, whoever covers your area. They're going to be very amenable to coming into your facility, talking to you. We're very, very concerned about this threat. And if you haven't talked to them in a while, you probably should. Yes, sir.
Nobody ever talks about this department, but when you talk to nickel mines and the number of hours you spend investigating all the staff of people investigating, I don't know the exact answer, but what's the cost for that to do an investigation like that? And is it really in the budget, or it's there because you're appointed to a state police officer? It's implied.
Yeah, great question. So what's the cost of these investigations looking into these threats? I'll tell you just a little bit to put it in context of the Pittsburgh incident that I spoke about. You know, an anonymous post on social media with a fake account, that's a lot of work for us. We're going, and contrary to popular belief, we need court orders, search warrants to do anything. So we have to go to Facebook or we have to go to Twitter with an emergency order signed by a judge, release subscriber information for that profile, and it comes back to a fake name and an IP address in another state that might have been routed through an onion router or something like that. Then we're chasing providers, we're on providers trying to get a quick response, and seconds are count. Again, is this real, is it not real? And we're doing that around the clock. I can tell you around the clock in that particular incident. So it's extremely expensive, and some days there's 10 of those threats, and some days there are 2, but we feel we have no choice. I mean, we can't. Yeah, and then after the fact, extraordinarily resource-intensive investigations. People are going to expect answers from us to look at every digital device, 9 phones, 10 home computers, every social media account, interview hundreds of people. The cost can be in the millions on a significant investigation. I can't imagine what the Las Vegas shooting cost to investigate. Staggering. Yes, sir.
I'm under the impression that most of the incidents that we're seeing are done by single perpetrators.
They are.
Occasionally, we have an event that seems more conspiratorial. I'm thinking of Oklahoma City, for example, where there were a number of people inspired to do that. But is that a correct impression that these are lone wolves?
Vast majority of the time, it's one person. I think it's difficult to get 2 people motivated to the point to commit the same crime at the same time. In San Bernardino, that was a terror attack inspired by ISIL, and that was a husband and wife team that did that. Pretty rare. One thing you will see, though, is every active shooter event, it's usually reported as 2 or more shooters. So on the backside, it's typically 1. Now, sometimes people help them, we're knowledgeable, and we're very interested in that on the investigative side. Who provided the weapons to them? Who knew and didn't say anything? Who drove them to the location, like in the Pulse nightclub? Somebody drove him to that scene, and she knew about it, and she was charged for it. Yeah, typically single offenders. Yes, sir?
You offered a tip line, but we also have our local law enforcement, our sheriff is here today. What's the preferred method for people like us to share information? Is it that tip line? Is it calling 911?
What's the best way to share information? I would say whatever is easiest for you. Whatever's easiest, if you have a great relationship with your local PD and your company wants it, that's what you should do. If it's calling 911, if it's imminent, that's fine. We'll move you to a non-emergency line. If it's a state police tip line, you can also do this anonymously. A lot of people don't want their name associated with it, the judgment, or don't want to be involved. You can report these anonymously the vast majority of the time. However it gets into the system, we just have to work hard to be together to bring it together. And in Pennsylvania, that's difficult. We have 2,300 municipalities, 1,180 municipal police departments.
So what's the fastest?
The federal agencies.
What's the fastest way?
Any of the lines that I put up. The PASIC tip line, it's 24/7, and a trained analyst is going to answer it regardless of the day or night. Not that 911 operator is not trained, they are trained. So whatever's the easiest way. Report on your social media platforms too. Facebook, we took over 90 threat to life referrals from Facebook last year alone. Just my agency. I have no idea how many others, but somebody who's threatening suicide or threatening to commit an act. So, yes, sir.
In what ways can the media be helpful? I'm sure that there are plenty of ways the media doesn't help with these kinds of things, but what ways can the media be more helpful in either thwarting or helping investigation?
In my experience over almost 25 years now, and a lot of particularly heinous incidents, I found that working with it's always a little tougher to deal with the national media, so you never want to forget about your hometown folks that you're going to need on all the regular casework. But I always find them very, hey, can you put out about this registration plate, or has anybody seen this picture? And the speed at which they can do it now to put it on their Facebook page, it's incredible. You don't have to have a news conference anymore. And I found that they've always been very helpful. I can't, now sometimes like at nickel mines or the frame, manhunt, when the international media is there and they just smother the scene, but I understand they have a job to do as well, and they want to get the coverage, and going into the community can be invasive, but they have a job to do as well, and they have to pay their bills, so I get it. I don't know if I can think of anything else that would be more favorable. I just had a positive experience almost wherever I've worked in PA. I mean, there's been some bad experiences, of course, but a reporter that you trusted that let something out, but it's an anomaly. Yes, sir.
You talked about once it gets in the system, a tip. Does it ever get out of the system? Suppose the people here follow your advice, report some specific activity, and an individual's called out, and it's completely innocent. A couple co-workers are talking about doing some target shooting at a farm over the weekend. Investigation turns up nothing. Is there some flag that follows that individual? Because data is eternal, and databases have created issues for people who are on no-fly lists and have other real-life consequences that they did nothing to deserve. So what happens on the other side if no threat is found?
That's a great question. You were so eloquent and so well-spoken, I don't think I have to repeat the question. Yes, there are a lot of laws that govern what we can collect, how we collect it, and what the retention period is. In Pennsylvania, it's 9102. It's a Criminal History Records Information Act that dictates what we can collect for criminal investigations and intelligence matters, and when we have to purge it. For example, both under federal law and state law, all records have to be purged within 5 years if there's not additional information to reinforce it. And we certainly have ways of categorizing it. But no, we're very, very conscious of protecting people's rights and civil liberties when we're doing this work. There's some gray areas in intelligence, and how many times have we seen, and the FBI has been very public about this, that they concluded an investigation and the person went on to kill a lot of people because just legally they couldn't take it any further. They didn't really want to close, we call them a guardian lead in the FBI system. But legally, there was nothing else to do. There was nothing to justify it. The Pulse nightclub shooter is a great example of that. The Boston bombers is another one. Those were both active FBI guardian leads, but there wasn't any legal means to continue it, so they closed them because of we adhere to the Constitution. So there are challenges with it, but we're very adept at making sure people's privacy and civil liberties. We don't want to use what we do or the threat that we're facing as an excuse to work around through my contact information.
Thank you.
Question. So one more question? Okay. Yes, sir.
My wife and I are friends with a 13-year-old neighbor girl who tutored over the years. She recently was threatened by a neighbor girl off the street that she would kill her with a knife. The when she went to school and told the guidance teacher what has happened. The guidance teacher's response to her was, it didn't happen in the school, it's not our problem, you need to go have your parents call the police. Was that guidance teacher misguided? It seemed like they were both students of that, the same grade, at the same school, having a common guidance. There's a confusion, so obviously there's a confusion about what to do, the stress of handling that situation, who's telling the truth.
Sure.
But she is extremely stressed out, but I thought it was kind of poor on the guidance. So what's the role in an extreme ruling with the adolescent world? Should we be calling that the hotline ourselves as somebody independent? How does an outsider get involved in something like that, or just strictly a parent's responsibility?
I don't want to come down that particular teacher because I don't know all the facts, but I would expect if there was a threat known to the school that they should be talking to their police department. There's some mandatory reporting requirements, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, or a threat for violence. Also, the whole law that was passed that enabled Safe to Say, it reports both ways. It's not only kids reporting things into their school, but it's the schools themselves reporting stuff into Safe to Say. But as a parent, as somebody who even heard about this incident, I think it's all of our moral responsibility to report that. We would rather see 7 reports about the same thing than nothing or incomplete information from one. So I think in the age that we live, and I mean, look what can happen when we don't address these properly. Everybody should report this, and we'll tell you if it's the 11th 911 call in this, or it's the 14th tip. You know, hey, what else do you have? Yeah, that's really. I'll hang around afterwards if there's anybody that would like to speak about something specific, and my contact information is up there, including my cell phone, which I guess is now going to be on the internet. It's all good. Text away, wipe yourself out. I'll just change it if it gets too. No, thank you very much.